Hello, folks. One and all, each and every one of you folks. This is the show. I'm Connor, that's Phil.
Oh.
That's Phil. And then when you introduce yourself and you say, oop.
I don't know why this happens. Is it something wrong with your recording?
How very dare you, sir? Is it something wrong with my recording? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Certainly from the listener's perspective, because it is my recording, all the shade is on you for any audio issues, because my voice comes through so crystal clear. So much more than people wish it would, especially those 2 or 3 listeners who really hate the mouth sounds.
Yeah, those seem weirdly unavoidable in a world in which we're not, uploaded to the cloud. Artificial intelligence constructs able to speak, or indeed, maybe you should just get one of those voice box synthesizers. People would like that.
Maybe it is one of my major character flaws that all the words I say come out of a mouth. Not much I can do about it. This is Heavy Hands. Welcome. We jumped the gun last week and talked about. This is maybe the first time anyone has ever jumped the gun on Grant Dawson.
I'm so glad I don't have to talk about Grant Dawson anymore.
Me too.
We watched a Grant Dawson fight with Zane for the Depressed Us as well.
Yeah.
And it's too much Grant Dawson.
Just pure misery. Any amount of Grant Dawson is too much Grant Dawson. So if you want to hear about next week's or this upcoming UFC card, and you missed last week's episode, I don't know why you would miss an episode with Grant Dawson as part of the title. But if you want to hear about that, we didn't just talk about Grant Dawson. We talked about a bunch of other fights. It's a pretty quality UFC card. So go check that out. This week, we're doing our Between UFC Cards episode just a week later than we would have if we had paid attention and known what was happening. So there's other stuff happening in the fight world. Canelo Alvarez just had a fight with Jermell Charlo last weekend. Cedric Doumbe, kickboxing great, continues to forge ahead as an MMA fighter. He fought a man named, is it Jordan Zebo?
I am going to defer to you.
Okay. I'm sure it's not Zebo, which is the fun way I want to pronounce his name. And certainly the way you've been pronouncing it to yourself, Phil. I know how you English pronounce things.
Yeah, as disrespectfully as possible.
Yeah, I'm going to have a taco with Zebo.
Zebo? That's how you communicate with foreigners.
Slowly and rudely. So we're going to talk about, there's not much to say about that Doumbe fight. It was 7 seconds. And it was a dope 7 seconds. And everybody's talking about the sort of atmosphere in the room and the way that Doumbe sort of manufactured that moment with as he often does, with the unbelievable arrogance of a man who seems to know with absolute certainty that he is going to win violently. But we're going to talk about Cedric Doumbe in a broader frame, as a kickboxer, what we maybe expect out of him as an MMA fighter, and really just use his impressive 7-second KO as a jumping off point. And then, I don't know, there's some other stuff going on as well. There was a great Cage Warriors fight. Amanda Lee, ONE FC star, retired. It's not ONE FC anymore, is it? It's one something?
Is it just one?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we did ask people in the comments last week, Phil, like what they would like to hear us talk about. And there were a few suggestions for one. And I don't know what it is. I just feel like I sort of, maybe this is a very American frame of mind, right? Like, we elected Donald Trump. We like a sleazy con man who tells you to your face that he's conning you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have Dana White, absolute piece of shit. Doesn't really make that a secret. It's very easy to hate Dana White. Whenever I see ONE FC stuff, I think of Chatri.
Yeah.
And he is like, he's very scummy in a way that makes me not want to talk about his promotion, because it's too duplicitous, you know. He's got the suit, he's got he's got that iron-on smile. And I'm like, you know, just tell me to my face that you're robbing me. We don't have to go through all this rigmarole.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where, like, he is running scams of such obviousness that it is itself a filtering mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the deliberate spelling mistakes put in phishing emails when Chatri's like, one is going out to 1.5 billion viewers. You're like, no, it isn't.
Yeah, no, it isn't.
But isn't. Nothing's doing that.
And you ONE fans in the comments, don't turn this into some DC Marvel shit. All fight promoters are evil people. Make no mistake. That's what we're saying. We're really just talking about, just don't like that Chatri guy. Just don't like him. You know, much in the same way that Jack Slack loathes Scott Coker. You know, who also, from a certain segment of people, gets a much bigger push because he's not just as much of an open asshole as Dana, but he's just another Dana White. They're all Dana Whites. Just
with slightly different traits emphasized.
Exactly, yeah. So anyway, we'll see what else we end up talking about in segment 3, but we are going to start today's episode talking about Canelo Alvarez. He fought Jermell Charlo. Speaking of people I don't care for those Charlo twins.
What's that?
I don't know. They're just off-putting. Just find them annoying. And I don't particularly like their fighting styles, I suppose. Jermell's style, from the commentary, a lot of comparisons. You know, these are like hard-hitting, relatively low-output fighters. I don't know. I just don't. I've never seen a great deal of the sort of class that I'm looking for in a fighter that really draws me to a fighter, which Canelo has, and also has in fights, in many fights, sort of eschewed the classier aspects of his style. I would say this was one of those, while also being strategically a pretty brilliant performance from Canelo. But a very blunt strategy, which he just stuck to mercilessly, basically from the very, very beginning of the fight. So yeah, what did you make of it?
Yeah, I think pretty much that would be my take on it. It was the big man strategy, I think, is the way I would class it. Is that, you know, some of the issues with Canelo of late, I mean, obviously the Bivol fight was one in which I think everyone was shocked to see Canelo kind of getting overpowered.
Mm-hmm.
He's always been this weird mixture of like relatively slow footwork, but very active and like crafty and technical defense.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been able to basically walk people down and essentially outpunch them. And so in the Bivol fight, you're seeing him against someone that he's smaller and physically weaker than, and then suddenly many of these things are starting to fall apart. Like, he's not working as a quick smaller fighter. It's not the way that his game really functions. And so, you know, given that and some other sort of sketchy performances lately, I think people were thinking, I mean, rightly so, he's had a lot of fights. Was this his 60th fight?
Perhaps. All I know is the man has been fighting since he was like 15 or possibly younger.
Yeah. Crazy amount of fights. Reasonable to assume he might be on the downslope. But then you realize how good his style is when he can be the bully.
Yeah.
Because what we saw here was a performance against someone who's, you know, if you take the broad brushes of, you know, Canelo is foot slow and sort of slightly foot slow and plodding and so on, you might think a very mobile pot shotter kind of fighter might be just what the doctor ordered. And this, in fact, shows that it is really not. because he's good at closing people down. He made a really diligent. He did a really diligent job of just cutting the ring off with arcing strikes.
And with his feet. I mean, I think this was actually probably one of the best ring-cutting performances I've seen from Canelo. I think part of that was down to Charlo's style. I would describe as more sort of it works because he's a good athlete, more than like when Canelo fought somebody like Erislandy Lara and really had a nightmarish time trying to cut him off consistently. Part of that was down to Charlo not seeming to have a great idea of how to connect his footwork to his strikes, putting himself out of position.
It was like at some point, yeah. I mean, debatably, this speaks to kind of Alvarez's footwork, very deliberate footwork, as a benefit in this fight, which you might not necessarily think going in, because I think, Jermell Charlo is looking at footwork from a very MMA perspective. That he builds distance, and then as you chase him, he punches back, or he moves out of the way and then catches you as you kind of leap forward. But obviously, Canelo Alvarez does not leap forward at all.
No,
he's just constantly inching into range, and Charlo found himself, I think, very, very uncomfortable. Yeah,
he's not immune to overthrowing. I mean, Bivol chewed him up for overthrowing an awful lot, but he will overthrow when he's in range, and he will get into range very diligently, which he did a brilliant job of here, particularly when he found the one knockdown of the fight. But it was basically a kind of move that he did many, many times, which is he would either actually jab or just sort of stick the jab out as a blinder, / rangefinder, and use that to take like some what you might call gathering steps, where he would just sort of, often like 3-4 small steps, front foot, back foot, just getting into range, sliding into position, and then uncork a massive right hand or a massive left hook to the body or something else.
A lot of it is the same philosophical sort of explanation that made sort of Strickland so troubling for Adesanya.
Yeah.
That it was just, much, obviously, the footwork of Canelo Alvarez is incomparably, I'm saying he's foot slow, but it's incomparably better
You
than
heard it here
Strickland.
First. Canelo Alvarez, better boxer than Sean Strickland.
Yeah, just this basic idea of just slowly edging your way into range against someone who, and sort of coming in behind non-committal strikes until you are in range.
Yeah.
Against someone who just wants you to be overcommitting.
Yeah.
To cover that distance with a punch.
And someone who doesn't necessarily have, I mean, it's not like Charlo doesn't have a jab, but like Adesanya, doesn't really use it that well to actually make it impossible to get into range on him. And in response to pressure, which Canelo clearly picked up on, will, like Adesanya, this is a good comparison, I think, will make moves with his feet that take that jab out of the equation. And at that point, it is a downward slope. It's a slippery slope. It's a downward spiral where the more pressure is put on him, the less he is in position to jab, the less ability he has to keep you out of range, the more he needs to rely on big single pot shots. I mean, there are a couple points in this fight. I admit I was a bit surprised because I heard the talk about this before I watched it. And everybody was saying how Charlo just like completely passive, completely gave up. And I think overall that is a somewhat fair impression. But it's not like Charlo didn't sit down and try to throw some combos at any point in this fight. But there was nothing really systematic, nothing, no ability to control Canelo to stop having this kind of fight in this range, other than what these amounted to were moments where he was like, maybe this will scare Canelo off. And that's just very hard to do. You can frustrate Canelo, but you can't scare him off. The man has a granite chin. He's absolutely fearless, and he's got great defense. And he just doesn't care about the possibility of getting hit. That is not in itself discouraging to him in the slightest. He's happy to get hit if he needs to. So yeah, I think that's a really strong comparison. Just Charlo having all these tools, which, like, is the opponent stupid enough? Are they messy enough to take some big, ridiculous gamble that I can counter? When they do, like Adesanya, Charlo's a great counterpuncher. But if they're just sort of methodically getting into range over and over again before letting anything go, and then not only are they not just letting wild strikes go, which isn't to say Canelo wasn't throwing some wild strikes, but he also, the shot he knocked Charlo down with was a surprisingly straight right hand, sort of based on, I think, how Charlo was deflecting his overhand right off the glove. He snuck it right between the guard. And then also the fact that Canelo, in that kind of threatening position, is maybe the best in the sport at making one punch look like a different punch. Letting you see the fact that he's about to hit you, but still, if you are in a passive defensive position, it's a game of, is that left hand going to the body or the head, or is it actually a left uppercut? Or is it actually one of these sort of like splayed arm fakes he likes to do, and it's a right hand coming in after? You're in position, you're in range to get hit, then you don't want to play the guessing game of what punch is Canelo trying to hit me with. He's really good at disguising his shots.
It's what he lacks in speed, he makes up for in crafty, deliberate, telegraphing.
Yeah.
I think Lucas Fenrich did a very good breakdown of this fight for Bloody Elbow. And he was mentioning these sort of sweeping shots that Canelo was constantly throwing, I think, to stop Charlo from skirting out. Eventually they just, I think, built that image in Charlo's head of just, I've got to keep my gloves up to stop to stop these shots coming in from the side every time. Mm-hmm. And, Canelo was happy to just smash those shots into Charlo's arms because he was just physically overpowering him the whole time. He was deadening his hand. He was deadening his arms. Yeah. And then eventually, Charlo was just like, I've got to keep my hands up to the sides. And then Canelo just dinged him straight down the middle.
Snuck a very straight yet very hard shot right down the middle. This was also, I thought, from Canelo, and this is the other thing that makes Charlo's game work. Who's the guy that I liked more than either you or Kyle? Haney. Haney gets a bunch of hate for being a punch and clutch fighter. What about Jermell Charlo? This man is a punch and clutch fighter. Right? Mm-hmm. And I don't like the punches as much. They're not like smooth jabs. They're not like cool principled. It's like, here's a bomb, and now I'm going to tie you up. And from that perspective, I think this was a brilliant, not a great infighting performance from Canelo. Basically, anytime I watch modern boxing, I'm like, I would love to see some good infighting. It's one of my favorite parts of the sport, and you just don't see it very often anymore. But a very good anti-infighting pressure fight from Canelo. Normally, you might hear that and think like back foot, long range, distance management kind of performance. But in fact, it was all pressure, relentless pressure, and always, not always, but very close to always, meeting Charlo's attempts to tie him up really, really well. And either outright denying them or tying up in a superior position. There were a couple of instances where the referee said, your hands are free, and allowed them to fight. And in those few instances, Canelo was usually in better position. But a lot of times he just denied Charlo the opportunity to tie him up. Pressure, and then Charlo would take that step in, and Canelo, who fought almost this entire fight from that very typical high guard of his, would just post or just frame him off. Just like inside hand position, catch him on the shoulders as he's stepping in, catch him on the biceps, or just stick the jab hand in his face, just cross face him basically and push him back. So yeah, like a very physical but principled kind of physical fight where he just didn't let Charlo have. That would have been Charlo's other route to respite, basically, if the footwork wasn't getting him away. And we say this, I mean, we advise fighters to do this, right? In our breakdowns, like you can't just run away the whole time. You got to step in. He just couldn't step in comfortably or get to a good position or actually succeed in tying Canelo up. Rather, when he tried to step in, it was either being denied or he was the one being tied up. So I thought that was a really good element of this. Like I said, a strategically really brilliant fight from Canelo. While it seems like such a straightforward strategy, keep the pressure on right from the jump, cut off the ring, don't let him tie you up. But he really stuck to it very consistently.
It also lets you know that, like, even if he might be losing a step at this point in his career, like, mentally he is still very much able to deliver consistent aggression, which is what, is really the thing that starts to go for most fighters.
True.
And when they're mentally starting to fade away. So, I mean, I don't know. As I said, I think so much of it is the way his game can shine against someone that he can overpower, as well as the very specific elements of Charlo's style. I don't know if this. So it's his best performance in a while. I don't know if it's anything that makes you think that like some of it would be replicable in, say, a Bivol rematch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just shows you that Canelo is still a very, very, very good fighter.
Yeah. Would love to see a Bivol rematch. I'd be very curious how Canelo would approach that. Because I fully expect he's a very flexible, strategic fighter. He will come in with some completely different approaches from one fight to the next. I mean, just look at the Triple G fights. They're like radically different, mostly based on what game plan Canelo came in with. But yeah, a nice late stage Canelo performance, certainly. Okay, well, let's take a break on that note. When we come back, we're going to talk about the man, Cedric Doumbe, who is, I think, making some waves as a potential, next Israel Adesanya kickboxing to MMA convert. Hard to say as of yet based on his MMA results, and I think we'll try to talk about that angle. But we're also just going to kind of let this be a introduction to Cedric Doumbe, as his fight this week was, I think, to many people, an introduction to Cedric Doumbe. So that, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello, welcome back to the show. We're talking about Cedric Doumbe, who I think we have only discussed once before. Am I mistaken, Phil? I think we talked about him a bit with Luca Bourdon.
I think so, yeah. And mostly in the, he's super cool, and Luca being like, I hope he never comes to MMA kind of way.
Yeah. Well, Luca's curse, once again, comes to MMA, and then inevitably, he will get beaten by Sean Strickland.
No doubt, or whoever is the Sean Strickland of his time and weight class.
Yeah. Has anybody checked up on Luca since that happened, by the way?
Yeah, I've seen he was basically just like recommending that Adesanya just has to now go on an anime training arc.
Yeah.
Before he returns.
I thought he would want Adesanya to sort of just go into seclusion from society for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if he never comes back, and Luca isn't going to complain that bad.
So, yeah, Cedric Doumbe. He had his 5th MMA fight this weekend, known to us before as a basically kickboxer we should check out.
Mm-hmm.
And he took on Jordan Zebo. I'm sure that name is probably Frencher than I'm pronouncing it. Jordan. And everybody was talking about the clip of Doumbe, like, working the crowd before the fight. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they had, like, a beef. It's tough to tell because Doumbe appears to have a beef with every single person he fights.
Yeah.
He is like a swaggering, arrogant, like, his style is like thin-skinned in a way that is very enjoyable, where he will just get really mad and annoyed and like complain to the ref, and like he takes everything personally. That's the impression, anyway, of Doumbe's fight. So I have no idea if he actually had a beef with Zebo or if he was just putting himself in the sort of Diaz brother-esque fight mindset of, if I'm fighting you, you are my sworn enemy. But he was calling to the crowd. He was calling out Jordan, and I think they were saying, "T'es mort, you're dead," in this like call and response chant. And then he nuked him in 7 seconds. Official time says 9. I'm pretty sure he knocked him out at 7.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot to say there. I mean, and I don't think there's a lot to say about the quality of Doumbe's MMA opponents thus far, but that's fine. I'm not sure that Alex Pereira was out there fighting world beaters in his first couple MMA fights either. But yeah, I mean, what do you make of Cedric Doumbe as an MMA fighter? I mean, do you think he will be a Pereira and Adesanya? Will he make the transition successfully? Are these good signs or completely meaningless pieces of evidence so far?
I mean, so I think it's worth looking back at the, how people thought of both Adesanya and Pereira when they first came to the UFC, which is that they had very sort of different expectations about them. I think Adesanya was highly touted as being like this guy's a genuine title threat. His ground game is still a question mark, but all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's the fact that he's now gone through his essentially like a championship career, and like being out-grappled has literally never been the issue ever.
Sure, it was part of the issue against Blachowicz, but it's the only time it has actually like been really key to him losing, and I would not say that was the only key to him losing that fight.
Yeah, but essentially he was someone who was seen as being well built for MMA, very diligent about like attacking hands, fighting grips, had good hips, and all this other kind of stuff. That had a lot of people thinking like, this guy is going to be good at fighting off takedowns. He's going to be he is someone who both fights from a distance, but also is very good at like, he's just a natural clinch fighter.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff is going to translate well to him being a good MMA fighter. And it did. And the interesting thing about Alex Pereira is that that wasn't true at all.
Yeah.
Like most people, when they looked at him, they were like, ooh. Kyle famously like did an article where he was looking at Pereira. And, I'm not saying this to be like, oh, and look at Kyle because he didn't get it right. And, Pereira went on to be a champion himself.
He deserves it. Go on, lay him out.
I mean, I'm saying it because, like, I read that article and I watched his fights and I agreed with him. I was like, yeah, I agree. Like, we're talking someone who didn't maintain distance very well, who got into inadvisable grappling situations all the time, didn't seem to have any grappling instincts really much whatsoever. There was no real assumption. There was no real need. No real reason to assume that he wouldn't flame out in MMA like many kickboxers have. But obviously, he really worked hard on his ground game. He had an MMA career which was actually quite long.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, he was training, he started MMA in 2015, which means he now has had basically, he is in the, if someone started MMA in 2015, they would be in the prime of their career now.
Yeah, it was quite spread out, I believe, a lot of his early fights.
Yeah, but that's not, it's not necessarily the important thing. Primarily, that's important for other people, for people to have lots of fights, partially to get used to the sensation of fighting against other people and, the stress of it, and to be able to manage that and so on. That's why it's important for people to have lots of fights when they're, but obviously that doesn't matter for Alex Pereira because he was a professional kickboxer and a champion. So his main thing was that he just needed to get time in the gym, which he did with Glover Teixeira. And, a lot of those weaknesses haven't gone away. And also, I think we didn't realize how fucking huge he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how that's just like a really good insulating factor against a lot of stuff that involves people getting a hold of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just being an actual, like, titan out of legend has been a help to Pereira. I related to size, I was going to say the other thing with Doumbe. And you haven't mentioned Doumbe, but I sense the implications. Does Doumbe's style look like it's like made to be sort of the anti-MMA style that allows him to be the same kind of kickboxer he is? That's not necessarily clear. But it's made even less clear by the fact that Doumbe's in arguably a good division.
Yes.
And that Adesanya and Pereira undoubtedly helped by the fact that they are at middleweight. The division of guys who do one thing.
And whilst the population of very good wrestlers at welterweight is less than it was in, say, GSP's heyday, there's still a lot more of them than there are at middleweight.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what it might look like when Doumbe starts fighting. I mean, I don't get the feeling he just had a fight in PFL. I don't get the feeling he's going to be held back that long. Nor that he can necessarily afford to. And this is another useful point of comparison with somebody like Pereira or even Adesanya. Like, both of them had quite a bit of MMA experience, both time and actual number of fights. Adesanya more fights, I think Pereira more time. But by the time they got to their big stage UFC careers, Doumbe, I mean, when was his first MMA fight?
Was it 3 years ago, I think? Something like that.
Yeah, it was not long ago. It was against Arbi Emiev in 2021. So it's just very difficult to say as of yet whether he will make a good MMA fighter. But I sensed that you were walking up to certain elements of his style that maybe give you the same impression that Pereira's style gave.
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of splits the difference, if I'm going to be honest. I think he's definitely more well-suited to MMA than Pereira looked like he was.
Yeah.
I will say that. So how does Doumbe work? I think primarily we are talking a kind of stance, sort of shifting counterpuncher. I think another, like, shouting out another person we know.
Do we?
Dan
Tom?
Dan Martin did an article about him in for the Fight Site back in 2020 because he's his favorite fighter.
Okay.
Which is very good. And yeah, basically, Doumbe is a sort of aggressive, stance-switching, aggressive counterpuncher. And an increasingly aggressive one in, sort of as his fights have gone on.
He's sometimes insanely aggressive. Other times, like, reckless. Doumbe is a pretty difficult fighter for me to wrap my head around, actually, because his style is pretty moldable, but not always in ways that seem smart. Like I said, like you can just like do one annoying thing, like Doumbe's rematch with something with an N. Why am I forgetting it? Nabiev. Starts, I mean, a great knockout and a really good process of getting to that knockout when he finds his jab. And you're like, wait a minute, Doumbe's a technician, which he often is in his fights. But the fight starts with him just like going insane and throwing hideous looping shots, like throwing himself out of stance, losing his balance. And then getting his like overswinging so hard that he collides into a clinch with Nabiev with his back turned. And then he just sort of like looks annoyed at the ref while Nabiev is hitting him in the clinch. And then Nabiev keeps throwing punches and he turns his head and he gets hit in the back of the head. Personally, I don't really think Nabiev did anything wrong. The referee does not intercede, and Doumbe is literally just letting him look at the back of his head and just like turning away from him. And Doumbe is like mad about this. He's really, really mad, as he often seems to be in his fights. But then he kind of cools down at a certain point and becomes like a jab machine who's setting up beautiful combinations that are really not nearly so overthrown, and sneaking in great counters and really deftly slipping all of the punches that Nabiev is sending back at him. But for a moment, it's just utter chaos. And I would not call that like an aggressive counterpunching style at all. I would call it brawling. It's absolute brawling. And so for me, it's, I don't know what, if I can say with as much confidence, like, what is Doumbe's style? Because he will just fucking brawl. And is that going to get pared away? Is it going to get shut off in MMA? He has been markedly more.
Or alternatively, is he going to be one of these guys where it's going to be like Robbie Lawler, where he gets taken down and then he's just immediately,
he just hates it,
insanely furious.
Fuck this. And what does that mean? Does he have the ability to fight back from that using that anger? In kickboxing, he usually has. Making Doumbe mad has never really been a very consistent way of beating him. Though he will make things that in other fighters would be grievous mistakes, and do crazy, overthrowing, and like I said, like literally like falling down sometimes when he misses. He throws so hard. But he seems quite at home. I think he sort of carries that chip on his shoulder into any fight, no matter what. But is that, can you turn that off in MMA? Can you channel it? Is he going to be like many kickboxers before him, like Ioane and Jacek? Is he going to be like more sort of low output as an MMA fighter? I think it sort of seems like he will be. He does seem wary of the thought that colliding with somebody too recklessly could lead to the kind of thing that will annoy you, but which you cannot immediately punish the opponent for doing, i.e. a takedown. But I don't know how durable that is, because his opponents aren't very good yet.
Yes.
And most of them aren't.
In many ways, it doesn't really matter in what way he approaches them at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I say that's a somewhat good sign. I think he's taking it seriously, but again, I think Doumbe is an emotional fighter. And who knows what elements of his style he can actually, box away for good. Also, none of his opponents are really grapplers, so or certainly not good wrestlers. So it's just not really been tested yet.
I mean, it's not even 3 years ago, is it? It's 2 years ago when he had his debut. So wait a minute, he debuted at the age of 29 in MMA, and Alex Pereira debuted however many years ago? 8 years ago. So he was 28.
Okay.
And Adesanya debuted like a long time ago.
Yeah.
2012, 11 years ago.
Wow, really?
When he was 23.
So I was mistaken. I thought it was Pereira who had started earlier but had fewer fights. But no, Adesanya, more MMA fights and started earlier.
Yeah, it's one of those things like Holly Holm where he made it to the UFC and like had a really substantial MMA career before then. In terms of like the time he'd been training.
Yeah. I mean, I will say for Doumbe, he is clearly a great athlete. He's very fast. He's powerful. He can just fly across space. And he's shockingly accurate. And, I mean, this is the other thing with Doumbe. For as wild as he looks, he keeps his eyes on his opponent. He's surprisingly good at finding home with these seemingly insane wide swings that he does throw sometimes. But this is the thing. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around Doumbe's game and project how well it will transition to MMA because...
Yeah, a lot of it is built around a big... Yeah, I think you're right. It's around this kind of comfort that... a comfort that he can always win close exchanges.
Yeah.
And that if he overthrows and gives his back, or if he gets, a kick caught or anything like that, there's no actual, major issues for him. But
yeah,
those kind of overcommitments might be a lot more significant in MMA. I think he had a great fight with Brad Riddell, who I was trying to think of as I think of sort of Brad Riddell as being approximately similar, as being, they're sort of around the same size, despite Riddell being in a lower weight class.
Yeah.
He's not too much smaller, but they're both sort of two-handed,
Doumbe is not tall.
Aggressive counterpunchers in that kind of way. Riddell, obviously, a bit more
much more of a
studied.
Much more of a counterpuncher.
Yes. Riddell had a pretty aggressive performance against Doumbe a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, that's the thing that you mentioned, essentially, is that I think Riddell's style was pared away by being in MMA.
Yeah.
He was himself less likely to commit to things
mm-hmm.
In MMA because there's simply so much risk involved.
Riddell was also a rock-solid wrestler, and I have no idea if Doumbe has that skill set. But Riddell clearly put in a lot of very hard work to learn how to wrestle. I mean, he could take opponents down and control them if he needed to. Quite a few times in his UFC career, had to save himself with takedowns when he got into trouble. And was really, really difficult to take down even against giant, bricked-up opponents like... man whose name I'm forgetting. But you know who I'm talking about.
In the big Dagestani guy.
Yeah.
Magomed Mustafayev?
That's right. Yeah, even in those fights where he had to do a lot of defensive wrestling, it really held up. And I have no clue if Doumbe has that actual... This is not a thing where we're talking about instincts or style. We're talking about skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And... yeah, Adesanya is a pretty good defensive wrestler, actually. He can get caught out of position, and you can see that the reactions aren't, so hardwired in. But when he sees the takedown coming, Adesanya, for all the reasons you mentioned, gets inside grips, fights hands, frames really well. He's difficult to connect a clean takedown on unless you catch him badly out of position. Brad Riddell... even better, I would say, as a defensive wrestler. Pereira, huge. What's Doumbe's thing? Is he going to be a great defensive wrestler? Does he have a clinch style that seems to suggest that might channel into a defensive wrestling game? I don't think so.
And watching him against a career lightweight in Brad Riddell, where you're like, he doesn't look much bigger than Brad Riddell.
Yeah, he's short too. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure, how you would look against, Shavkat Rakhmonov.
Right.
Although he's not in the, he's not a welterweight anymore for good reason. Khamzat Chimaev. These people are just huge compared to Cedric Doumbe.
Yeah.
And Adesanya was at least, also insulated by being very big for his weight class.
Yeah.
So
not as beefy as Pereira, but big and tall. Yeah.
Tall for his weight class. I mean, actually, there was a lot of talk about how that he was too small for middleweight, because he did fill out a fair amount over time.
True.
So I think the general consensus is, like, Doumbe is spectacularly talented. He's going to have a lot of fun fights. His grappling is an X factor which you need to weight more heavily than it was for the other ones, because he's in a better division and he's smaller.
Yeah.
Honestly, he might want to consider trying to make the horrendous cut down to lightweight.
I did wonder about it. Two. Yeah, MMA is such a weight cutting dependent sport compared to like boxing and kickboxing.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of elements of Doumbe's style work with his posture, work with his size as a kickboxer, because he's like a little Wolverine. He keeps a very low stance.
Yeah.
He really like bends his knees, kind of leans forward, puts himself in a position where he's ready to slip and already be in range, basically, to punish whatever you've missed him with. That may not be such an advantage in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
It usually isn't. Not saying that there aren't little MMA fighters who are really good, but most of them have different styles from Doumbe. So yeah, I don't know. I will be watching it with interest. Doumbe is a guaranteed entertaining fighter.
Yeah, I think whatever happens, it's going to be very fun. But I think the odds of being in, better divisions, being smaller, and honestly being put into very difficult fights very early, I think, which is probably going to happen, because he says like he wants to fight in the PFL's tournaments. Those are good veteran MMA fighters in those things. Like, it's a step change up from people he's been fighting so far.
But who knows? I mean,
several step changes.
The thing with Doumbe is that he used to be much more of just a wild man, and did show later in his kickboxing career. Even though the wildness never went away and was always either he could tap into it or it would be dragged out of him sometime at a moment's notice. He could also tone it down and be a shockingly technical, efficient fighter too. Doumbe's got a great jab. He's got good defense, surprisingly difficult to hit clean. I mean, even when he's flailing, he's surprisingly difficult to hit clean. But when he's thinking defense, he's quite a considered fighter. So maybe, he can pick up new skills and figure a style. I mean, he's certainly not been like kicking as much in his MMA fights from what I've seen. Has been, I think, more of an aggressive counterpuncher. I'm going to put the pressure on you, like just hold the initiative the whole time and rely on the fact that when you throw, it's going to be stupid because you're not a kickboxer. And I'm going to hit you with something devastating. And so far it's worked. Maybe he should move up to middleweight instead of going down to lightweight. Just be even smaller, but, at least you're fighting middleweights.
Yeah.
Not actually advising that, but
it would be funny.
So, I don't know. We will see with Cedric Doumbe, but if he gets what he wants and he gets put into a tournament in PFL, then I think we're going to find out sooner rather than later whether he can cut the mustard as an MMA fighter.
As I said, the other transfers over to MMA had, in terms of time, even if they didn't increase their level of competition that much, they were in MMA for a long time before they started fighting people who were actually good. There is a chance he will fight people who are actually good very quickly.
Yeah. We shall see. All right, let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Cage Warriors fight from last weekend, Luke Riley versus, how is this name pronounced? It's got it's the two umlauts that throw me off. If this was like a Dutch or a German name, I'd say Loof. But
yeah, sure, do that.
Loaf. Like das Boot, you know? Das Boot.
Sure.
Okay, we're saying Alexander Loaf versus Luke Riley. Angela Lee retired. I don't know how much we're going to have to say about that, but we may as well mention it. Hey, we just did. All of that, maybe more, maybe less after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil, how do you pronounce this name? It's
Loaf.
Luke.
Loaf.
Luke.
Yes, thank you, Connor. Very good. Very droll.
Royley? Is that how you would say it?
Yes, Connor. Everyone has got the joke now.
Well, you told me to watch this fight, Phil. How dare you? I had a great time. Luke Riley, as you informed me, is what's the name of the team? Next Generation Liverpool?
I believe so, yes.
Which is the team that produced Molly McCann?
Yep.
And Pimblett, too?
Yep. And they like their big-haired city action fighters in that gym.
Yeah, what's with the haircuts of these people?
It's a look.
Is it?
Yeah, it's distinctive.
It's weirdly... I'm surprised Molly doesn't have this haircut.
Yeah, that is true. As the soul, as the girl on the team.
Yeah, she should have the same sort of we haven't changed how we cut our hair since the Beatles kind of look going on.
Well, maybe she should be bald.
She should be bald. I'm sure she'd look great. Luke Riley, Alexander Loof, the British commentator said. We'll just say Loof until proven otherwise. Had an absolute ridiculous, disgusting banger of a fight last weekend at Cage Warriors 160. My eyesight's bad. And both of these undefeated prospects, Loof was 5-0, I believe. Riley was 7-0. And fun to just watch an all-out. This is consistently my favorite kind of fight. I'm not so protective of talented prospects as some people are with my fantasy matchmaking. I like to see two good young fighters either fight much more experienced fighters that they might beat, but if not, they're going to learn a lesson, or fight somebody who is coming up basically right alongside them and just see what happens. And these are routinely the most exciting fights that you get on any MMA undercard, any UFC undercard when they pit two unbeaten prospects against each other. This was no exception, right in the mold of what I expect from that kind of pairing.
I mean, yeah, Cage Warriors, I think, just as a organization, is just really settled in as something which produces sort of quality fighters of almost every stripe, right?
Yeah.
It's now something where we've, it's had, as you mentioned, it's at its 160th show. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we've just got a lot of fighters that have come up through Cage Warriors that have ended up being just either really three-dimensional fighters like Arnold Allen, or they've just been they're just crazy fun action fighters like, say, Paddy Pimblett, but also people who split the difference, what's his face, Nathaniel Wood. And yeah, Luke Riley is clearly in the insane action fighter mold. This is someone who's been hurt in many of, like, he's one of these guys who's made it his thing where he gets hurt and comes back. And
he did it in this fight.
He did that in this multiple times in this fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, the general kind of dynamic of the fight was him getting picked off at range because he's got approximately the same level of defensive savvy as Pimblett. He's just a more aggressive, fearless puncher. He is a good, crafty puncher.
Yes.
And seemingly bottomless cardio.
Yeah, he is a much, much cleaner puncher than Pimblett. No question. And I would say, while he shares his aggression and his recklessness, I would say he's actually better than Paddy defensively. He will, like, take a back step when he sees a punch coming at him. You know, he will try to dip out of the way and then charge back in. He's just as wild in intent and the kind of fight he will throw himself into, but he looks significantly more polished than Paddy. That's not saying too much. I'm not saying he's an amazing technician, but Paddy is genuinely pretty bad at striking. Luke Riley is not. And yeah, for all that, I really enjoyed Alexander Loof's style. This was one where I was a little disappointed that he lost, because he looks pretty smooth, you know?
He had he just had a smart approach. He was digging Riley on the way in, like keeping him like off balance with jabs, low kicks, body kicks. And then, mostly just, and then, like, essentially in round 2, just knocks Riley clean out. And then woke him up by essentially bouncing his head off the mat.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, gassed himself out, trying to go for the finish. But yeah, basically, almost undoubtedly one of those finishes, one of those sequences where he just stopped at one of the points. Like he woke Riley up. There's no doubt that he wasn't out.
Yeah. But the thing is I can understand his compulsion to try to get Riley the hell out of there, because the way this fight starts, it is Loof in command. Really, like, he's landing all the cleaner shots. He is countering really well, as you said, working off the jab and pretty good evasive footwork. I mean, he wasn't enjoying the pressure that Riley started to build up on him, but he did a pretty good job of keeping that jab online and making it just difficult for Riley to run him over without at least being greeted by something. And then, and even some nice clinch work as well. When he did a couple of times when he stepped in as Riley was surging forward and grabbed him in the clinch, landed some devastating elbows. I'm not sure if that's the shot that did it or not, but Riley in the last minute of the round has a massive cut over his right eye. And then Riley just piles on. He just gets him in one moment where he stumbles against the fence. Perhaps as a young and inexperienced fighter, what you see there is Loof getting a little tired already. Just because of the pressure. Because he's fighting really, really well. But as a couple UFC commentators will tell you at every opportunity, doesn't mean they're wrong, it's very tiring to fight going backwards unless you're really comfortable in that kind of fight. And I haven't seen all of Alexander Loof's career up to this point, but I'm going to go ahead and guess he's not faced a great many people among his 5 opponents who have pressured him this relentlessly and this fearlessly.
I mean, yeah, it's extremely infrequent in any kind of sport, that any kind of fight where you basically knock someone out, and then the end of the same round,
they're crushing,
is then chainsawing you up against the fence.
Right.
Like, sometimes, people will get hurt in a kind of, it'll be a kind of Czech Congo Pat Barry thing, and that someone will get hurt, and then they'll just swing back and knock and really badly hurt the other guy. But it's the fact that Riley went from being essentially KO'd to being, like, fully on the pressure again within the space of a round, which was Very impressive.
Yeah. And what I was saying is at the end of the first round, it is Loof getting hurt at the end of that round as well. A round he otherwise is comfortably winning. The pressure there starts to get to him and possibly the fatigue. He starts stumbling. He gets his foot caught in the barrier, in the gap between the fence and the canvas a couple times. Seems to lose his footing. And then Riley just sort of walks in and like has to eat a shot and just keeps the exchange going once Loof is fully cornered and knocks him down. So over the course of the entire fight, there's this weird feeling of Loof, who seems to be fighting much smarter and getting these big moments, and also a nice long stretch of pretty smooth control. At the end of the contest, it has the feeling of Riley just sort of inexorably breaking him.
Yeah, it's got a very slightly McDonald Lawler-esque vibe to it.
Yeah,
like the craftier, rangier guy is just, he's doing a really good job. The other guy just will not let him win. Just keeps coming after him.
Yep. Sometimes that's what it is, man. Sometimes it's a technical contest. Sometimes it's strategic. Sometimes it's, I am not going to let you beat me. And that's basically it. And it did make me...
Yeah, like I said, just like those two things, just being like a good puncher and just being insanely relentless.
Yeah.
Will probably carry Luke Riley fairly far.
Yeah, I mean, I would also like to see Alexander Loof again. This is my first time watching him fight. I think he's got.
I had a very similar reaction to you. In fact, like I was watching this and I actually felt kind of sad. Thought
like, this guy's pretty good. He's got potential.
Yeah, he fought a smart fight. It was just like just couldn't maintain it.
Yeah. So
smart and violent fight.
Yeah.
Again, he could have dropped out. One of the things that made it a great fight was the multiple kind of swings in momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suspect that this could be, I hope it is for a guy like Loof, a very valuable learning experience, and maybe not one where you even you take a concrete lesson away, but rather now it's happened kind of experience. Because what I really saw here was simply a fighter who was the less experienced of the two, basically confronting an opponent who essentially didn't play by the rules, who didn't respect the things that Loof seemed to take it as a given an opponent had to respect, and with good reason, because as you said, he was badly hurting Riley on multiple occasions. Clearly a dangerous fighter in his own right. I'm reminded of the I don't know if any of the listeners or you even know this, Phil, but I'm sort of I like a certain board game.
Risk?
I love Risk. But I play it with chess pieces on a grid. And I'm reminded of at the start of my kick with chess, I played a couple games with my girlfriend, who now will not play me anymore. Because this is not...
Or do you ruthlessly destroy her and then rub it in her face?
No. I'm a pretty gracious winner, I think. I just win because we played a couple games for fun and then I got obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. So then I got better, and she was just playing it casually, and suspected that she was playing against a normal person who would not then make it their fixation. But what it reminded me of was the second game we ever played. She had beaten me in the first game we ever played, and then we rematched, and something happened. We were both playing terribly, and I won a piece. And then she kept making a series of what should have been good moves. Except that, if you know a little more about chess, you know that these are moves which offer trades. And when you win a piece, and your opponent offers you trades, you just take all the pieces. You're like, this is not an even trade anymore because I'm up a piece. So if you keep giving me chances to take pieces that are quote-unquote defended, at the end of the day, I will have the only piece left on the board. Right? When you're down material, you shouldn't trade. And that's what this made me think of. Was that Loof was like, well, this is a good move. This is a good move. You have to respect this. And Riley was just happy to eat it. Because none of those smart moves actually diverged at all from his overall strategy, which was extremely blunt and simple, which was to just keep the fight as fast-paced as possible and keep having exchanges and keep ending those exchanges with you landing the last punches. So
I mean, it's also just like, in some ways, it's just responding to very, very natural incentives as well. Like, if you punch someone as hard as you can when they're very out of position, and you see their eyes roll back in their head, and they like flop backwards on the floor, it's generally a fine thing to do to just empty the gas tank trying to finish them, because they're 90%, 95% of the time they are toast. More than that, even.
Riley should have been toast. I mean, was not a bad decision for Luft to expend some energy there. He took a gamble that was very sensible.
Yeah. I think you're very right. It's in terms of the, it's a lesson. It's simply that, like, there are some really tough fucking people out there.
Yeah.
And you also have to be very tough in order to beat them.
Yeah. And maybe just you come into a fight being like, I know this dude's tough. This is going to get miserable at some point, and not be shocked by that, not react to the first feeling of fatigue with panic, but be like, okay, now's the moment when I sort of have to weather some shit until I can get my energy back. It is simply the experience itself can be the lesson. This is something I will confront again, and I won't be surprised by it next time. So, fantastic fight. I really should watch more Cage Warriors. I mean, a ton of great UFC fighters have come out of there, and every time I do watch a card, also the crowds are great. I mean,
I've been to a few in person, and it's always been fantastic.
Yeah, like, there's always fantastic energy in those arenas, and this was certainly one that I was happy to have been recommended.
Yeah. And when people on the way up, they build these followings. People have their own specific chants for, like, Jack Shaw when he was on his way. I remember, like, there was just this big, like, Welsh contingent, and it's always a good time.
All right, well, I think that's it. I mean, we mentioned Angela Lee. Do you have anything more to say about her? She retired last weekend at the one event, and in fact, retired unexpectedly, because the main event of that card, I think, became a title fight. As a result of her retirement. Do you have anything to say about Angela Lee's career? We haven't followed it very closely, at least I haven't.
Just that she was, like, really important to one, I think. She was their sort of big star, and they seem to have sort of settled into a bit more of a, I think people are now actually watching it rather than having just to have Chatri lying to everyone. I think it has become more of a real promotion rather than just like a fake thing. And I think, fights like Angela Lee were a big part of that. She was like just a super exciting, like very personable. But their first sort of in a way that I guess like Gina Carano was for Strikeforce.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Ronda Rousey, but the person who replaced her, Stamp. What's her first name?
Postage.
Yes, thank you. Postage Stamp. But yeah, she beat Handley in that title fight, and she looked great. Finished up with a body shot.
Yeah.
And yeah, it looks like sort of set to continue where Angela Lee left off.
Yeah, we will undoubtedly be, I think, touching on more, especially when the UFC schedule goes to shit again, which it inevitably will, be touching on more one events, as they seem to have actually, as you said, built a reputation for having real events. Lord knows they've been quite successful with one of the nerdier subsets of MMA fans, which is MMA fans who aren't actually MMA fans, but really just like kickboxing. Because they have been doing their small gloves Muay Thai thing for quite a while now, and it seems to be pretty successful. Probably not hard to outbid some of the fight fees that Thai fighters get in Thailand.
Yep.
So they're just getting them over, probably still relatively cheap, but it's probably big money from the perspective of these Thai fighters. They've run a lot of those events. PFL is making their big moves. God, it just occurred to me that we're going to have to talk about Ngannou Fury coming up.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
I don't want to.
Mostly my thoughts are going to be like, hope Fury loses.
Yeah, you do? Then we're not going to see. If they finally started talking about Fury Usyk, Fury said he might do it. You want to see him lose, and then...
Yeah, I just want to see him lose. I just, like...
Anything that gets me to Fury Usyk, okay, I will accept. If it's a Tyson Fury win, then that is a small price to pay. I want to see that fight.
No, I just don't trust him anymore. I don't believe him anything that he says.
Yeah, me neither.
And if he's like, we're going to be having that fight, we're talking to Usyk, and even Usyk's team has, I think, been saying, we're actually genuinely moving forward on this. Tyson Fury has burned me too many times. He's said too much insane shit. I want him to lose in a funny way.
It would be funny.
To Francis Ngannou, and then Francis Ngannou can get massive amounts of money. Like I said this on Twitter. I was before Mayweather McGregor had Floyd had to win that. He had to. Otherwise, it would have validated just some of the dumbest people in the world.
Yeah. MMA fans, you mean?
Yeah.
And Robin Black.
But, and many people who said very, very stupid takes on it. And it would have been, it was the what was it? The innovation and all that kind of stuff.
The angles.
The disruption.
Oh, disruption,
Yeah. This way, if Ngannou wins this, no one is going to say anything apart from he punches really hard, ha ha ha. That's going to be it. No one's going to be able to say anything about how Ngannou is actually this next generation, person who's found the Tao of fighting or whatever.
That's true.
That people are gibbering about the last time.
Yes.
It's just going to be funny. It will be. That's it. So yeah.
All right, you've sold me. I don't know if I'll be rooting for it, but I would appreciate it if it somehow happens, which it really, really shouldn't. But we'll talk about
it. Really should.
It really shouldn't, and almost certainly will not. But we'll talk about that when it comes around. Anyway, that is it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We will be back next week to unfortunately recap whatever horrible thing Grant Dawson actually does to Bobby Green. Not to spoil it, but if you didn't catch last week's episode, we were sort of spitefully optimistic in our pick, I think is the correct way to say that. And then a week after Dawson Grant, so this will be next weekend's card, the weekend after next, or however you want to phrase that, we've got another pretty solid-looking UFC fight night to talk about. Sadiq Youssef versus Edson Barboza. Jennifer Maia, Vivi Araujo in the co-main event. Jonathan Martinez versus Adrian Yanez is one that I am particularly looking forward to. There is quite a lot of good stuff on there. Also, Darren Elkins versus my boy TJ Brown. Seems like both a fight I like because a favorite dark horse fighter of mine might win, and also doesn't seem like the worst possible matchup you could give a Darren Elkins who insists on fighting to this day. So we'll be back to talk about that next week. Until then, hope you enjoyed the show. Find us on Twitter at EvilBearJackson, at Boxing Bush. Check out the Patreon. There's bonus episodes up there. And we'll catch you next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.